Close your eyes and imagine yourself beneath a canopy of stars, where the night sky stretches endlessly above, like a vast tapestry woven with silver threads. The air is soft and cool against your skin, carrying with it the faint scent of olive groves and the distant murmur of ancient seas. Here, in this timeless space between waking and dreaming, we gather as countless generations have gathered before us, drawn together by something far older than memory itself. Tonight, we journey to a land where gods walked among mortals, where heroes challenged fate itself, and where every mountain, river, and grove held secrets that could change the course of eternity. This is Greece, not the Greece of modern maps and boundaries, but the Greece of the soul. The Greece that exists in that sacred realm where stories live and breathe with their own immortal life. What is it about these ancient tales that continues to call to us across the centuries? Why do the names of Zeus and Athena, of Odysseus and Persephone, still stir something deep within our hearts? Perhaps it is because these stories speak to truths that transcend time itself, truths about love and loss, courage and fear, the eternal dance between order and chaos that plays out in every human heart. As you settle into this moment, allow yourself to drift beyond the familiar boundaries of the everyday world. Let the gentle rhythm of these words carry you backward through time, past the noise and rush of modern life, past the centuries of change and progress, back to a time when the world was young and full of wonder. Here, in this ancient landscape of the imagination, gods still shape the destinies of mortals, heroes still embark upon impossible quests, and every shadow holds the promise of mystery. The Greeks themselves knew something we have perhaps forgotten in our hurried age. They understood that stories are not mere entertainment, but sacred vessels that carry the deepest wisdom of the human experience. In the flickering light of ancient fires, they passed down these tales not as fiction, but as truth, not as escape from reality, but as a way of understanding the very fabric of existence itself. So let yourself be drawn into this world where the impossible becomes inevitable, where the line between mortal and divine blurs like mist at dawn. Let the ancient voices speak to you across the vast expanse of time, carrying with them the accumulated wisdom of countless generations who found in these stories not just wonder, but understanding, not just beauty, but truth. As we begin this journey together, remember that we are not merely observers of these ancient tales, but participants in an unbroken chain of storytelling that stretches back to the very dawn of human consciousness. The fire around which we gather may be invisible, but it burns as brightly as any flame that ever illuminated the faces of those who came before us. All of us, united by our shared need to make sense of the magnificent mystery that is existence itself. In the beginning, there was nothing, and yet that nothing was everything. The Greeks called it chaos, not the disorder we might imagine, but something far more profound, a vast, yawning emptiness that contained within itself all the potential for creation. Picture, if you can, a darkness so complete that light itself had not yet been conceived, a silence so absolute that it preceded even the concept of sound. This was not mere absence, but presence in its most primordial form, pregnant with possibilities that had not yet learned to dream of themselves. From this infinite void, this cosmic womb of potential, the first stirrings of existence began to emerge. Not through violence or sudden transformation, but with the slow, inevitable certainty of dawn breaking over an endless horizon. First came Gaia, the earth herself, not as we know her now, with her mountains and valleys, her forests and seas, but as pure being, the fundamental principle of existence given form. She was the first to emerge from chaos, the great mother who would become the foundation upon which all other life would build. Imagine her awakening into consciousness like a dreamer slowly becoming aware of her own dream, vast beyond measure, patient beyond understanding. Alongside her came Tartarus, the deep, dark pit that would become the prison of gods and monsters. A realm so far beneath the earth that a bronze anvil dropped from the surface would fall for 9 days and nights before reaching its shadowy depths. And there was Nyx, the night itself personified, cloaked in darkness and trailing stars like jewels in her flowing hair, and her consort, Erebus, the deep shadow that lies between earth and the underworld. From these primordial beings came others, each representing fundamental forces of the cosmos. Gaia, in her infinite fertility, gave birth to Uranus, the sky, who spread himself above her like a star-scattered dome, and to the mountains that would rise from her body like the bones of the earth itself. She birthed Pontus, the sea, whose waters would cradle life and fairy heroes on their journeys between worlds. But it was the union of Gaia and Uranus that would set in motion the great drama of creation and destruction that defines all existence. Their love was both tender and terrible, the earth reaching up to embrace the sky, while the sky pressed down upon the earth with overwhelming passion. From this cosmic embrace came the first generation of true divinities, beings of such power and complexity that they would shape the very foundations of reality. The Titans were born from this union, 12 mighty beings who embodied the raw forces of creation itself. There was Oceanus, the great river that encircled the world, and his wife Tethys, mother of all the world's waters. Hyperion blazed with the light that would become the sun, while his sister Theia shone with the gentle radiance that would inspire the moon and stars. Rhea embodied the flowing of time and the cycles of life, while Cronus represented time's more ruthless aspect, the inevitable passage that brings both growth and decay. Mnemosyne was memory itself, the power that allows the past to live within the present, while Themis was divine law, the principle of order that prevents the cosmos from sliding back into chaos. Phoebe gleamed with prophetic wisdom, and Cous embodied the questioning intelligence that seeks to understand the mysteries of existence. Crius was the pillar of the south, and Iapetus the pillar of the west, both helping to hold the heavens in their proper place above the earth. Yet Uranus, though he had fathered these magnificent beings, looked upon them with growing fear and jealousy. He saw in their power a threat to his own dominion, and in his paranoia, he began to push them back into Gaia's womb as soon as they were born, refusing to allow them to see the light of his sky or to take their rightful place in the cosmic order. Gaia groaned beneath this terrible burden, her body stretched and strained by the weight of her imprisoned children. The pain she felt was not merely physical, but existential. The agony of a mother denied the joy of seeing her offspring grow and flourish. In her anguish, she conceived a plan that would forever change the relationship between the generations of gods and the very nature of power itself. From her depths, she forged a great sickle of adamant, a blade so sharp it could cut through the very fabric of reality. She called her children to her and spoke to them of revolution, of the need to overthrow their father's tyranny and claim their rightful inheritance. Most cowered before the enormity of what she proposed, but one, Cronus, the youngest, stepped forward with the cold courage of inevitability itself. The deed was done in darkness, swift and terrible, and Uranus was separated from his beloved Gaia forever, his power broken, his dominion ended. As his divine essence scattered across the cosmos, it gave birth to new wonders and terrors. The Furies sprang from his blood where it touched the earth, terrible goddesses of vengeance who would forever after pursue those who committed crimes against the natural order. The ash tree nymphs arose from the same divine blood, beings of gentler nature who would tend the groves where mortals would one day offer sacrifices to the gods. And from the foam where his essence met the sea, something unexpected and beautiful would eventually emerge, though that is a story for another moment in our long night of tales. With Uranus overthrown, the cosmos stood balanced between order and chaos, between the old ways and the new. Cronus took his father's place as ruler of the heavens, but the sickle that had won him power remained in his hand, a constant reminder that no dominion lasts forever, that every king must eventually face the threat of his own overthrow. The world that emerged from this cosmic drama was one of incredible beauty and terrible uncertainty. Gaia could finally breathe freely, her children released to explore the vast possibilities of existence. The Titans spread across creation, each claiming dominion over their chosen realm, weaving the complex web of relationships and rivalries that would define the next age of the world, the Age of Titans, shadows before the gods. Under the reign of Cronus, the world settled into a rhythm that was both majestic and melancholy, like a great symphony played in a minor key. This was the Golden Age, though few who lived through it understood that they were experiencing something that would later be remembered as Paradise Lost. Time itself seemed to move differently then, less urgent, more forgiving, as if the very cosmos was learning to breathe after the violent birth pangs of creation. Cronus ruled from his throne with a heavy awareness of the price he had paid for power. The sickle that had severed his father from dominion over the sky remained always within reach, both symbol of his victory and reminder of the violence that had made it possible. In his darker moments, which grew more frequent as the ages passed, he would hold the weapon and contemplate the weight of his actions, understanding with growing dread that the cycle he had initiated was far from complete. The oracle's prophecy haunted his dreams like a recurring nightmare that grows more vivid with each repetition. One of his children, the ancient voice had whispered, would overthrow him just as he had overthrown Uranus. The words echoed in the vast chambers of his mind, taking on new and terrible meanings with each passing season. Every birth among the immortals reminded him of his fate. Every act of defiance among his siblings made him wonder if the foretold betrayal had already begun. His wife, Rhea, moved through their palace like a living embodiment of sorrow, her maternal instincts at war with her helplessness in the face of her husband's growing paranoia. She had watched in horror as Cronus, driven by the prophecy's inexorable pull, had begun to devour their children the moment they were born. First, Hestia, their gentle daughter, who would have been goddess of the hearth, disappeared into her father's maw with barely a cry. Then Demeter, who would have brought the gift of agriculture to the world, followed by Hera, whose regal bearing was evident even in infancy. Each loss carved deeper into Rhea's heart. Yet what could she do against the power of the king of the Titans? Cronus was not acting from mere cruelty, but from the desperate logic of self-preservation. He genuinely believed that by preventing his children from growing to maturity, he could cheat fate itself. could break the chain of succession that had claimed his father and seemed destined to claim him as well. Poseidon was swallowed next, the future lord of the seas, disappearing into darkness before he could ever feel the touch of ocean spray against his divine skin. Then came Hades, who would have ruled the underworld with wisdom and justice, but who instead found himself trapped in a prison that was both womb and tomb, conscious but powerless, waiting in an existence that was neither life nor death. The other Titans watched this domestic tragedy unfold with a mixture of pity and relief that it was not their own children being consumed by the paranoia of power. Oceanus continued his eternal circulation around the world, his waters carrying stories and sorrows from one shore to another. Hyperion blazed across the sky, his light illuminating the beauty of creation, while casting shadows that seemed to grow longer and darker with each passing day. Themis, the embodiment of divine law, found herself in an impossible position. The natural order demanded justice, yet Cronus was the rightful king, and his actions, however terrible, were driven by the same force that had elevated him to power in the first place. The prophecy that tormented him was itself a manifestation of the cosmic principle she represented, the law that no power can remain unchallenged forever. Mnemosyne preserved the memories of these dark times, storing them away in the vast archives of immortal recollection, understanding that someday these sorrows would need to be remembered, learned from, perhaps even sung by poets who had not yet been born. Memory, she knew, was both blessing and curse, the power that allowed wisdom to accumulate across the generations, but also the faculty that made regret and guilt possible. The world itself seemed to reflect the melancholy of its rulers. Though the Golden Age was a time of peace and plenty, there was something subdued about its beauty, as if nature itself was holding its breath, waiting for some resolution to the cosmic drama that was unfolding in the heavens. The mortals who lived during this time, simple creatures compared to the gods, but possessed of their own humble wisdom, went about their lives with an unconscious awareness that their golden days were numbered. They lived without labor, for the earth gave forth its fruits freely, and they knew neither war nor want, neither disease nor the harsh necessity of struggle. Death came to them as gently as sleep, and they passed from one existence to another without fear or regret. Yet even in this paradise, the wisest among them sometimes looked up at the stars and wondered what shadows the future might hold. Meanwhile, Rhea's pain continued to deepen with each child she lost to her husband's consuming fear. When she found herself pregnant for the 6th time, she knew she could not bear to watch another infant disappear into the darkness of Cronus's terrible solution to the prophecy. This time, she would act, even if it meant defying the most powerful being in the cosmos. She went to her mother, Gaia, the ancient earth, who had seen the rise and fall of the first generation of gods, who understood better than anyone the cyclic nature of power and the futility of trying to escape one's destiny. Together, they devised a plan that was both simple and audacious, a deception that would require perfect timing and absolute courage. When her labor began, Rhea traveled to the island of Crete, to a hidden cave where the sound of her cries would be masked by the clash of bronze shields and the wild dancing of the Curetes, minor deities, who had agreed to aid in her desperate gambit. There, in darkness and secrecy, she gave birth to her 6th child, a son whose destiny would prove to be everything the prophecy had foretold and more. But there was no time to marvel at her newborn son, for Cronus would soon expect her to return with the child that he intended to devour. Wrapping the baby in soft cloths, she placed him in the care of the nymphs and the goat Amalthea, whose milk would nourish the future king of the gods. Then, with a mother's desperate creativity, she took a large stone and wrapped it in swaddling clothes, making it look and feel as much like a newborn as possible. Carrying this substitute back to her husband, she presented it with the same resigned sorrow she had shown with all the previous children. Watching as Cronus, too consumed by his own fear to examine the bundle, closely swallowed it whole. The deception was complete, but it was only the beginning. Hidden away in his mountain cave, protected by loyal guardians, and nourished by the milk of a divine goat, Zeus began to grow with a speed that defied even immortal logic. Each day brought new strength, new awareness, new understanding of the destiny that awaited him. The cave itself seemed to respond to his presence, becoming a place of power where the future pressed against the present like water against a dam. And in the court of Cronus, the king of the Titans continued his melancholy reign, unaware that the agent of his prophesied downfall was growing stronger with each passing moment, preparing for a confrontation that would reshape the very intonations of reality itself. The moment Zeus stepped forth from his hidden cave on Mount Ida, the world itself seemed to exhale after holding its breath for eons. No longer the helpless infant spirited away by his desperate mother. He had grown into a being of such radiant power that the very air around him crackled with barely contained lightning. His eyes held the depth of storm clouds and the clarity of mountain streams. And when he spoke, his voice carried the authority of thunder itself. The young god did not immediately reveal himself to his father, for wisdom, even divine wisdom, recognizes the value of patience and preparation. Instead, Zeus spent his early years learning the true nature of the cosmos he was destined to inherit. He walked among mortals in disguise, experiencing their joys and sorrows, understanding the weight of mortality that would never touch his own immortal shoulders. He conversed with the ancient spirits of earth and sea, absorbing their memories of ages past and their wisdom about the fundamental forces that governed existence. When Zeus finally revealed himself to Cronus, it was not with the dramatic confrontation that lesser beings might have expected, but with a calculated precision that spoke to his growing understanding of power and its proper use. Disguised as a young cupbearer, he served his father a drink that had been prepared with the aid of Metis, the Titaness of wisdom, who had become his first ally in the growing conspiracy against the old order. The potion worked with the inexorable certainty of fate itself. Cronus, overcome by an irresistible urge to regurgitate, brought forth first the stone that had been substituted for Zeus so many years before, and then, one by one, each of the children he had swallowed in his desperate attempt to cheat destiny. They emerged not as the helpless infants they had been when consumed, but as fully grown gods and goddesses. Their power matured during their strange imprisonment, their resentment sharpened by years of waiting in darkness. Hestia stepped forth first, her gentle nature unchanged despite her ordeal, already beginning to plan how she would make homes more sacred and families more united. Demeter followed, her thoughts turning immediately to the earth that had been denied her nurturing touch for so long. Hera emerged with royal dignity intact, her eyes already calculating the complex relationships that would define the new order. Poseidon appeared with sea foam, still clinging to his divine form, the crash of waves echoing in his laughter. And finally came Hades, pale from his long confinement, but possessed of a quiet strength that spoke of deep understanding of life's darker mysteries. The reunion of these divine siblings was both joyous and terrible, a moment of such concentrated power that the foundations of Mount Olympus itself began to form beneath their feet, drawn into existence by the sheer magnitude of their combined presence. But their joy was tempered by the knowledge that their freedom had come at the cost of war. For Cronus would not surrender his throne without a struggle that would shake the very pillars of creation. The conflict that followed was unlike anything the cosmos had ever witnessed. This was not a battle fought with swords and shields, but a war of fundamental forces, where the very nature of reality itself hung in the balance. On one side stood the Titans, ancient and powerful, masters of the elemental forces that had shaped the world since its birth. They commanded the loyalty of many of the Earth's primal spirits and drew their strength from the deep roots of creation itself. On the other side stood the Olympians, younger but possessed of a different kind of power, one that looked not backward to the primordial past, but forward to a future filled with new possibilities. Zeus wielded the lightning that could split mountains and the thunder that could wake the dead. Poseidon commanded not just the sea, but the very concept of fluidity itself, the power that allows change and adaptation. Hades brought with him an understanding of endings and transformations, the wisdom that comes only from accepting the inevitability of change. The war raged across the cosmos for 10 long years, a decade in which the very foundations of existence trembled under the weight of divine conflict. Mountains were thrown like stones, seas boiled and froze alternately, and the sky itself cracked under the pressure of opposing powers. Mortals cowered in caves and prayed to gods who were too busy fighting to hear their supplications. But Zeus understood that victory would require more than just the power of his siblings. In the deepest places of the earth, imprisoned since the first days of creation, lay allies whose power could tip the balance of the conflict. The Cyclopes, master craftsmen who had been locked away by Uranus and later by Cronus, possessed skills that could forge weapons capable of defeating even the mightiest titans. The Hecatontures, the 100-handed giants, commanded a ferocity in battle that was legendary even among immortals. The journey to free these ancient prisoners was fraught with peril, requiring Zeus to descend into the deepest parts of Tartarus, where the very concept of hope seemed to wither in the face of absolute darkness. But his courage was rewarded, for the Cyclopes and Hecatontures, grateful for their liberation, became his most loyal allies in the war that would determine the future of the cosmos. The Cyclopes, in their gratitude, forged for Zeus the thunderbolt that would become his signature weapon, a bolt of pure divine energy that could pierce any defense and strike down any foe. For Poseidon, they crafted the trident that would give him dominion over all waters, from the mightiest ocean to the smallest stream. And for Hades, they created a helm of darkness that would allow him to move unseen through any realm, becoming as invisible as death itself. Armed with these mighty weapons, and supported by their 100-handed allies, the Olympians pressed their advantage in a final cataclysmic battle that would be remembered as long as stories were told. The Hecatontures hurled boulders with their countless arms, creating storms of stone that darkened the sky. Zeus's thunderbolts split the heavens, each one carrying enough power to level mountains. Poseidon's trident stirred the seas into tsunamis that washed over continents. The defeat of the Titans was not merely a military victory, but a transformation of the cosmic order itself. Most of the defeated Titans were bound in Tartarus, guarded by the 100-handed giants who had helped overthrow them. But Zeus, in his wisdom, showed mercy to those who had not opposed him, understanding that ruling through fear alone would make him no better than his father. Atlas, who had led the Titans in battle, received a punishment that was both terrible and strangely noble. He was condemned to hold up the heavens for all eternity, becoming the pillar that separated earth from sky. His burden was great, but it was also essential, for without his strength, the cosmos itself would collapse back into the chaos from which it had emerged. Prometheus, who had aided Zeus in the war, was granted a place of honor among the victors, though his complex relationship with the new king of the gods would prove to be a source of both wisdom and conflict in the ages to come. Oceanus, who remained neutral in the conflict, was allowed to continue his eternal circulation around the world, his waters carrying news and stories from one realm to another. When the smoke of battle finally cleared and the last echoes of divine conflict faded into silence, the world that emerged was fundamentally changed. The age of the Titans had ended, and the age of the Olympians had begun. Zeus took his place upon the throne of heaven with the weight of victory and the burden of responsibility resting equally upon his shoulders. The three brothers divided the cosmos among themselves according to their natures and their desires. Zeus claimed the sky and the upper air, becoming king of the gods and master of weather and fate. Poseidon descended to rule the seas and all waters, from the vast oceans to the underground rivers that connected the realm of the living to the realm of the dead. Hades, understanding that someone must govern the inevitable destination of all mortals, took dominion over the underworld, becoming lord of the dead and guardian of the boundaries between life and death. But even as they celebrated their victory, the Olympians understood that their triumph was not an ending, but a beginning. The cosmos had been reshaped, but it still required governance, still needed gods who could maintain the delicate balance between order and chaos, between justice and mercy, between the needs of immortals and the aspirations of mortals. From the crystal halls of Mount Olympus, now fully formed and gleaming like a jewel set between earth and heaven, the new order of gods began to establish the patterns that would govern existence for ages beyond counting. The mountain itself seemed to pulse with divine energy, its peaks lost in clouds that sparkled with the residual lightning of Zeus's power, its slopes adorned with gardens where ambrosia grew and springs where nectar flowed like liquid starlight. Zeus, now firmly established as king of the gods, sat upon his throne of polished marble and gold. But kingship among immortals was not the simple matter it might appear to mortal eyes. Each of his divine relatives possessed powers that could reshape reality, personalities that had been forged in the crucible of cosmic conflict, and ambitions that stretched across eternity. Managing such a pantheon required not just strength, but wisdom, diplomacy, and an understanding of the complex web of relationships that bound the immortal family together. She was magnificent in her beauty, terrible in her wrath, and possessed of a dignity that commanded respect even from her husband. Her peacocks strutted through the heavenly gardens with their tail feathers spread like living jewels, while her golden throne sat beside Zeus's own symbol of her position as Queen of Heaven. Yet their relationship was marked by the same passions and conflicts that would characterize all the great love stories of mythology. The jealousy that would define so many of Hera's actions was not the petty emotion of a mortal woman, but something far more profound, the righteous anger of divine order confronted with divine chaos. Zeus's nature was to scatter his power like lightning, touching earth and sea and sky with his influence, creating new life wherever his attention fell. Hera's nature was to gather, to protect, to maintain the sacred bonds that held civilization together. Their conflicts were not mere domestic disputes, but clashes between fundamental principles of existence itself. Poseidon ruled his watery realm with a power that was both creative and destructive, nurturing life in the depths of the ocean, while commanding the tsunamis that could wash away entire civilizations. His palace beneath the waves was built of coral and pearl, its halls filled with the music of whales and the whispered secrets that currents carried from distant shores. His horses, born from sea foam and storm, could gallop across the surface of the water as easily as across dry land, their hoofbeats marking the rhythm of the tides. The Lord of the Seas was quick to anger and slow to forgive, his emotions as changeable as the weather over open water. Sailors would learn to read his moods in the color of the waves and the direction of the wind, offering sacrifices of wine and honey to ensure safe passage across his domain. Yet he was also capable of great kindness, guiding lost ships to safety and providing fresh water to those who honored him properly. His kingdom was not the place of torment that later religions would imagine, but a complex realm where souls found the afterlife their mortal actions had earned. The Elysian fields bloomed eternal spring for heroes and the virtuous, while Tartarus provided appropriate punishment for those who had committed crimes against the gods or the natural order. Hades himself was perhaps the most misunderstood of the Olympians, seen by mortals as grim and terrible when he was actually fair and inevitable, the force that gave meaning to mortal existence and ensured that the cosmos did not become stagnant. His helm of invisibility, forged by the Cyclopes, allowed him to move unseen through any realm, observing the actions of gods and mortals alike, with the detached wisdom of one who would eventually welcome all beings into his domain. Demeter brought to Olympus the profound understanding of growth and harvest, of the cycles that governed all living things. Her golden hair rippled like fields of grain in summer wind, and her laughter had the warmth of sunshine on fertile earth. She was the goddess who taught mortals the arts of agriculture, transforming them from hunter-gatherers into civilized beings who could build permanent settlements and plan for the future. But her power was not limited to the benevolent aspects of nature. Her love for her daughter would eventually lead to one of the most profound myths in the Greek pantheon, a story that would explain the changing seasons and the eternal cycle of death and rebirth that governs all life. Hestia, the gentlest of the Olympians, chose to make her domain not in grand palaces or dramatic landscapes, but in the humble hearth that burned at the center of every home. Her fire was the sacred flame that transformed houses into homes, that brought families together in warmth and light, that connected the domestic sphere to the divine realm. Though she was offered magnificent temples, she preferred to be honored in the simple act of lighting the evening fire, in the blessing spoken over the family meal, in the welcome extended to strangers seeking shelter. Her decision to remain a virgin was not a rejection of love, but an embrace of a different kind of devotion, one that extended to all humanity rather than focusing on a single relationship. She became the protector of households, the guardian of the social bonds that held communities together, the divine presence that could be felt whenever people gathered in peace and harmony. Apollo blazed into the pantheon like a second sun, his beauty so radiant that even other gods sometimes had to shield their eyes when he revealed his true form. He was music and poetry, healing and prophecy, the rational mind and the inspired heart united in perfect harmony. His lyre could charm wild beasts and move stones to build cities, while his silver bow never missed its target. Whether that target was a monster threatening mortals or a boastful rival claiming to match his skills. From his oracle at Delphi, Apollo spoke truth to mortals brave enough to seek it, though his prophecies were often wrapped in riddles that required wisdom to interpret. His maxims, "Know thyself," and "Nothing in excess," became fundamental principles of Greek philosophy, guidelines for living that acknowledged both human potential and human limitations. Artemis, his twin sister, claimed the wild places as her domain, the forests and mountains where civilization had not yet imposed its order upon the natural world. She ran with her pack of silver stags through moonlit groves, her arrows bringing merciful death to those who suffered and swift justice to those who defiled her sacred places. Though she chose to remain forever young and virgin, she was also the protector of women in childbirth, understanding that the same power that could end life could also bring it into being. Her huntresses, mortal women who chose to abandon the world of men and marriage to serve her, found in her service a different kind of fulfillment, one that valued independence and skill over conventional feminine roles. Yet she was not without mercy, and those who served her faithfully could count on her protection against any who would harm them. Aphrodite's arrival on Olympus was like the blooming of the first flower in spring, a moment of such beauty and power that it changed the very nature of existence. Born from the sea foam where Uranus's essence had fallen, she embodied not just physical beauty, but the deeper force of attraction that draws all beings together, the power that ensures the continuation of life and the connection between souls. Her influence extended far beyond romantic love, touching every form of creativity and inspiration. Artists who sought to capture beauty in their work, poets who struggled to express the inexpressible, musicians who tried to translate emotion into melody, all drew upon her divine essence. Yet her power was not always gentle, for love could be as destructive as it was creative, and those who denied her proper honor often found themselves victims of passions they could not control. Ares, the god of war, brought to Olympus a power that was both necessary and terrible, the force that could protect the innocent but also destroy the peaceful. His relationship with the other gods was complicated, for all recognized the need for his strength in times of crisis. Yet none truly welcomed the chaos that followed in his wake. His love affair with Aphrodite represented the eternal connection between love and war, creation and destruction, the forces that together shaped the destiny of gods and mortals alike. Athena sprang fully grown from Zeus's head, born not from union with another, but from pure divine thought made manifest. She was wisdom in its most practical form, the intelligence that could solve problems, win battles through strategy rather than brute force, and guide mortals toward justice and civilization. Her allies missed nothing. Her spear was never thrown in anger, but always in the service of righteous cause. And her shield bore the image of Medusa, turning the power of her defeated enemy into protection for the innocent. She became the patron of cities, particularly Athens, which would bear her name and honor her with a temple that would stand as a symbol of human achievement for thousands of years. Craftsmen and artists looked to her for inspiration, understanding that their skills were gifts that connected them to the divine creativity that had shaped the cosmos itself. Hephaestus, though marked by physical imperfection in a pantheon of beautiful beings, possessed skills that made him indispensable to gods and mortals alike. His forge burned at the heart of volcanoes, and from its fires came wonders that could rival the works of creation itself. The golden servants that attended him were so perfectly crafted they seemed alive. His weapons could penetrate any defense, and his jewelry could enhance the beauty of even goddesses. His marriage to Aphrodite represented the union of beauty and craft, showing that true artistry required not just inspiration but skill, not just vision but the patience to bring that vision into physical reality. Though their relationship was troubled, it produced works of such magnificence that they became treasures sought by heroes and kings throughout the ages. Hermes darted through Olympus like quicksilver, his winged sandals carrying him from realm to realm with messages that could change the course of history. He was communication and commerce, travel and trade, the force that connected disparate elements and made exchange possible. His caduceus, topped with intertwined serpents, symbolized his role as mediator between opposing forces, the diplomatic skill that could resolve conflicts through words rather than warfare. But he was also mischief and cunning, the trickster who reminded even the greatest gods that wisdom sometimes required the ability to laugh at oneself. His pranks were never merely cruel, but served to deflate pomposity and reveal hidden truths, showing that even divine order required a certain amount of creative chaos to remain vital and responsive to change. Together, these 12 great Olympians formed a council that would govern the cosmos for ages beyond counting, each contributing their unique perspective and power to the complex task of maintaining the balance between order and chaos, justice and mercy, divine will and mortal aspiration. Their stories would become the foundation of Western literature. Their personalities, the archetypes that would help humans understand their own nature. Their conflicts and cooperations, the model for how civilized beings might learn to live together despite their differences. From their thrones on Mount Olympus, they looked down upon a world that was both their creation and their responsibility, knowing that their decisions would echo through eternity, shaping not just the present, but all the tomorrows yet to come. In the early days of the Olympian reign, when the new order was still settling into its eternal rhythms, there lived among the gods a titan whose wisdom was matched only by his love for the mortal creatures, who struggled to survive in a world shaped by immortal whims. Prometheus, whose name meant forethought, possessed the rare gift of seeing not just what was, but what could be, and in his prophetic vision, he glimpsed possibilities for humanity that even Zeus had not imagined. The mortals of that age were simple creatures, barely more advanced than the beasts with whom they shared the earth. They huddled in caves when winter storms raged, ate raw flesh, because they knew not the secret of flame, and died young, because they lacked the knowledge to heal their ailments or protect themselves from the countless dangers that surrounded them. They looked up at the stars with wonder, but could not read their meaning, heard the songs of birds, but could not interpret their messages, lived and died without understanding their place in the great tapestry of existence. Prometheus watched these struggling beings with a compassion that puzzled his fellow immortals. Where others saw crude animals barely worthy of notice, he saw potential, the divine spark of consciousness that made them capable of growth, learning, and even, perhaps, wisdom. In their fumbling attempts to build shelters, he saw the future architect who would raise temples to rival Mount Olympus itself. In their crude drawings on cave walls, he glimpsed the artist who would capture beauty in forms that would endure for millennia. But potential without opportunity was merely cruel hope, and Prometheus knew that mortals needed more than just the capacity for greatness. They needed the tools to achieve it. The most fundamental of these tools was fire, that transformative force that could cook food, warm homes, forge metals, and provide light to push back the darkness that held so many terrors. Fire was civilization itself in its most elemental form, the difference between mere survival and true human flourishing. Yet Zeus had forbidden the gift of fire to mortals, not from cruelty, but from a kind of divine prudence that feared what humans might become if they possessed such power. Fire was the prerogative of the gods, the sacred flame that burned on their altars and in their temples, the symbol of the divine energy that separated immortals from their mortal subjects. To give fire to humanity would be to blur the line between divine and mortal, to set in motion changes that could not be undone. Prometheus understood his king's concerns, but his love for humanity outweighed his fear of divine retribution. In secret, he climbed to the realm of the gods and stole a spark from the very hearth of Olympus, hiding it in a hollow reed that would carry the precious flame safely to earth. The theft was accomplished with such skill that initially no one noticed what had been taken. For how could the gods imagine that one of their own would risk everything for the sake of mortal creatures? The gift of fire transformed human civilization with a speed that amazed even Prometheus himself. Within a single generation, mortals had learned to cook their food, making it both more nutritious and more digestible. They forged tools of bronze and iron that made their work easier and their hunting more successful. They built hearths that turned caves into homes, and homes into gathering places where knowledge could be shared and culture could develop. But more than these practical benefits, fire gave humanity something even more precious: hope. The flame that burned on their hearths was a reminder that they were not forgotten by the divine realm, that they possessed within themselves a spark of the same creative energy that had shaped the cosmos. They began to see themselves not as helpless victims of fate, but as beings capable of shaping their own destiny through intelligence, cooperation, and determination. Zeus's anger when he discovered the theft was terrible to behold, but it was tempered by a grudging admiration for Prometheus' courage and a recognition that what had been done could not be undone. Fire, once given to mortals, could not be taken away without destroying them entirely, and even in his wrath, Zeus was not prepared to commit such genocide. Instead, he conceived a punishment that would serve as both retribution for the theft and a warning to any who might consider similar acts of defiance. Prometheus was chained to a peak in the Caucasus Mountains, bound with fetters forged by Hephaestus himself. Chains so strong that even Titan strength could not break them. Each day, an eagle sent by Zeus would come to tear out the Titan's liver, feasting on the immortal flesh that regenerated each night, ensuring that the punishment would last for eternity. The pain was beyond mortal comprehension, yet Prometheus endured it without regret, finding strength in the knowledge that his sacrifice had lifted humanity from ignorance to enlightenment. But Zeus's response to the theft of fire extended beyond the punishment of Prometheus alone. If mortals were to possess divine fire, then they must also learn to bear divine responsibility. To understand that every gift came with a price, every blessing with its corresponding burden. The king of the gods commanded Hephaestus to create a new kind of being, one that would carry to humanity both wonder and woe, blessing and curse, hope and despair. The creation that emerged from Hephaestus's forge was the first woman, shaped from clay and water, but animated with divine breath. Beautiful beyond mortal imagination, yet complex beyond mortal understanding. Each of the Olympians contributed to her making. Aphrodite gave her beauty that could stop hearts and start wars. Athena taught her the skills of weaving and crafting that would make her invaluable to any household. Hermes granted her persuasive speech and a mind capable of both wisdom and cunning, while Hera bestowed upon her the knowledge of marriage and family that would make her the mother of all womankind. They named her Pandora, all-gifted, for she embodied both the best and worst that the gods could offer to humanity. Zeus gave her as a bride to Epimetheus, the brother of Prometheus, whose name meant afterthought, the Titan who acted first and considered consequences later. Despite Prometheus's warnings about accepting gifts from Zeus, Epimetheus was enchanted by Pandora's beauty and wisdom, taking her as his wife with joy that was both genuine and doomed. Pandora brought with her to her new home a gift from Zeus, a beautifully crafted jar sealed with divine power and marked with warnings that it must never be opened. The jar sat in their household like a beautiful mystery, its presence both intriguing and troubling, for although Zeus had commanded that it remain sealed, he had not explained why, leaving Pandora and Epimetheus to wonder what treasures or terrors it might contain. Pandora's curiosity was not a flaw, but a feature, part of the divine design that had shaped her creation. Day after day, she found her eyes drawn to the mysterious jar, her thoughts circling around the question of what Zeus might have placed within it. The warnings meant to keep it sealed only increased her fascination, for she reasoned that if the contents were truly dangerous, why would Zeus have brought it into their home at all? The moment when she finally lifted the lid was both inevitable and tragic, the culmination of divine plan and mortal nature working together toward a destiny that would forever change the relationship between gods and humanity. From the opened jar poured forth all the troubles that would plague mortals for the rest of their existence. Disease and death, envy and hatred, war and famine, old age and despair, all the shadows that would follow. Humanity like wolves stalking prey. But in her horror at what she had released, Pandora slammed the lid shut before the jar could empty completely, trapping inside the last gift Zeus had placed there: hope. Some say this was another cruelty, keeping from humanity the one thing that might have made their suffering bearable. Others argue that it was the greatest mercy, for hope, trapped in the jar, remained always pure, always available to those who needed it most, never diminished by the harsh realities of mortal existence. The truth, perhaps, lies somewhere between these interpretations. Hope contained but not destroyed became humanity's most precious possession precisely because it remained uncontaminated by experience, forever offering the possibility that tomorrow might be better than today, that suffering was not the final word in human existence, that even in the darkest moments, the spark stolen by Prometheus continued to burn in the human heart. The story of Prometheus and Pandora became a foundation myth for humanity's understanding of their place in the cosmos. A tale that explained why mortal life was filled with both wonder and suffering, why the gifts of civilization came at such a high price, why progress and tragedy seemed forever intertwined in human experience. It reminded them that they were not victims of random fate, but participants in a cosmic drama, that their struggles had meaning and their choices had consequences that echoed through the generations. In the chains that bound Prometheus, mortals saw reflected their own condition, trapped between the desire for divine transcendence and the reality of earthly limitation. In Pandora's curiosity, they recognized their own irrepressible urge to explore, to question, to push beyond the boundaries set by authority, even when such exploration carried terrible risks. And in the hope that remained sealed in the jar, they found the strength to continue their journey toward wisdom, understanding that the path forward led not back to some lost paradise, but toward a future they would create through their own choices, mistakes, and hard-won understanding. When the gods had settled into their eternal patterns, and mortals had learned to live with both the gifts and curses that immortal attention brought, there arose upon the earth a generation of beings who stood between the divine and human realms, like bridges spanning an impossible chasm. These were the heroes, mortals touched by divine blood or blessed with gifts that elevated them above ordinary humanity, yet still bound by mortality's ultimate constraint, the certainty that their stories, no matter how glorious, must eventually end. The heroes emerged during an age when the world was still young enough that gods might walk among mortals, when the boundaries between realms were fluid enough that a determined soul might climb to Olympus or descend to Hades and return to tell the tale. They were born of unions between immortals and mortals, or chosen by the gods for qualities that reflected divine virtues, or driven by internal fires that burned too brightly for ordinary existence to contain. Perseus was among the first of these legendary figures, his story beginning with a prophecy that would become a familiar pattern in heroic tales, the prediction that a child would grow up to destroy his grandfather, King Acrisius of Argos, terrified by the oracle's words, locked his daughter Danae in a bronze tower, believing that isolation would prevent the birth of the prophesied grandson. But Zeus, drawn by Danae's beauty and perhaps by the challenge of reaching the unreachable, came to her in the form of golden rain, flowing through the tiniest gaps in her prison to father the child who would fulfill the prophecy. Perseus grew to manhood, knowing that his very existence was a defiance of fate, that his birth had been both miracle and doom. When he was cast out to sea with his mother in a wooden chest, it was the gods who guided them to safety on the shores of Seriphos. When the island's king demanded an impossible bride price for Perseus's mother, it was divine guidance that led the young hero to accept the challenge of bringing back the head of Medusa, the Gorgon whose gaze turned living beings to stone. The quest for Medusa's head became a masterpiece of heroic adventure, each element carefully orchestrated by divine will. Athena provided a bronze shield polished to mirror brightness, allowing Perseus to look upon the Gorgon's reflection without meeting her deadly gaze directly. Hermes contributed winged sandals that could carry the hero through the air like a god, while Hades lent his helm of invisibility to allow Perseus to approach his quarry unseen. But perhaps the most crucial aid came from the three Grey sisters, ancient crones, who shared a single eye and tooth among them, guardians of the knowledge Perseus needed to find the Gorgon's lair. Through cunning rather than strength, Perseus stole their shared eye, holding it hostage until they revealed the location of their sisters and the tools he would need to face them. The confrontation with Medusa was both terrifying and poignant, for the Gorgon had once been a beautiful priestess transformed into a monster by divine jealousy. As Perseus severed her head while looking only at her reflection. Her death gave birth to new wonders. From her blood sprang Pegasus, the winged horse that would carry other heroes on their quests, and Chrysaor, the golden warrior who would father other monsters and marvels. Perseus's return journey was marked by further adventures that demonstrated how heroic deeds rippled outward like stones thrown into still water. When he discovered Andromeda chained to a rock as sacrifice to a sea monster, his rescue of the princess led not only to love and marriage, but to the founding of a dynasty that would include some of history's greatest heroes. The rescue itself was achieved through courage, wisdom, and divine favor working in harmony, showing how heroism required not just strength, but the ability to inspire others to rise above their limitations. Heracles, whose very name meant glory of Hera, despite the goddess's hostility toward him, embodied the heroic ideal in its most extreme form. Born of Zeus's union with the mortal woman Alcmene, he possessed strength that bordered on the divine. Yet his life was marked by labors and sorrows that tested not just his physical power, but his moral character and spiritual endurance. The 12 labors imposed upon him by his cousin Eurystheus were more than mere tasks. They were symbolic journeys into the darkest corners of existence, confrontations with forces that threatened the order and safety of the civilized world. When Heracles strangled the Nemean lion, whose hide could not be pierced by mortal weapons, he was not just killing a monster, but proving that mortal determination could overcome seemingly impossible obstacles. When he cleansed the Augean stables by diverting rivers through them, he demonstrated that even the most degrading tasks could be accomplished through intelligence and creativity. His journey to capture Cerberus, the three-headed hound that guarded the gates of Hades, took him into the underworld itself, making him one of the few living mortals to visit the realm of the dead and return. The descent required not just courage, but wisdom. For Hades would only loan his monstrous pet to one who approached with proper respect and understanding of death's place in the cosmic order. Each labor taught Heracles something new about the nature of heroism, showing him that true strength lay not just in physical power, but in the ability to protect the innocent, serve the greater good, and face impossible challenges with unwavering determination. His eventual apotheosis, his transformation from mortal hero to immortal god upon his death, represented the highest reward that divine justice could offer to a life lived in service to others. Theseus brought a different kind of heroism to the world, one that emphasized intelligence and political wisdom alongside physical courage. His journey to Athens to claim his birthright as son of King Aegeus was marked by encounters with bandits and monsters that he defeated, not through overwhelming strength, but through cunning that turned their own methods against them. The adventure that made his reputation was his voluntary journey to Crete as one of the 7 young men and 7 young women sent annually to feed the Minotaur, the bull-headed monster that dwelt in an impossible labyrinth beneath King Minos's palace. Theseus's victory over the Minotaur was achieved through the aid of Ariadne, who provided him with the thread that would guide him back out of the maze, showing how heroism often required the assistance and wisdom of others. But Theseus's greatest achievement was not any single adventure, but his transformation of Athens from a collection of scattered villages into a unified city-state, demonstrating that heroism could express itself through political innovation and social progress, as well as through monster slaying. His establishment of democratic institutions and his protection of refugees and supplicants showed that the heroic ideal could evolve to meet the changing needs of civilization. Jason and the Argonauts represented heroism as a collective enterprise, showing how individual excellence could be magnified through cooperation and shared purpose. The quest for the Golden Fleece brought together heroes from across the known world, each contributing their unique skills to the common endeavor. Orpheus provided music that could charm even the elements. The Dioscuri brought their divine parentage and navigational skills. Atalanta proved that heroism was not limited to men, and many others added their strengths to make the expedition possible. The journey itself became a catalogue of wonders and challenges. From the passage through the clashing rocks that threatened to crush their ship, to the encounter with the sirens whose songs could lure sailors to their dooms. But perhaps the most complex part of the adventure was Jason's relationship with Medea, the sorceress princess whose aid made his success possible, but whose love would eventually become his destruction. The tragedy of Jason and Medea illustrated one of the darker aspects of heroic legend. The way that the same qualities that made heroes great could also lead to their downfall. Jason's ambition and Medea's passion, both admirable in their proper context, became destructive when they were placed in conflict with loyalty, honor, and the bonds that hold society together. These heroes and countless others like them became the bridge between the age of gods and the age of ordinary mortals, showing that humans could achieve greatness without abandoning their humanity. That mortality was not a limitation to be overcome, but a condition that gave meaning and urgency to noble action. Their stories became templates for understanding courage, wisdom, love, and sacrifice, models that would inspire countless generations to believe that they too might rise above their circumstances and achieve something worthy of immortal song. In the heroes, mortals found not perfection but aspiration, not easy answers but the promise that even the greatest challenges could be faced with hope, that even the darkest times contained the possibility of triumph, that the spark, stolen by Prometheus, continued to burn in human hearts, capable of achieving wonders that even the gods might admire. In the realm of the immortals, where power knew no earthly limits and beauty surpassed mortal comprehension, love became a force more dangerous than war, more transformative than magic, more lasting than the monuments mortals built to honor their gods. The hearts of the Olympians burned with passions that could reshape continents, spark conflicts that lasted for generations, and create bonds that transcended even the boundaries between life and death. The love stories of the gods were not the gentle romances of mortal poetry, but cosmic dramas where jealousy could trigger natural disasters, where rejection could curse entire bloodlines, and where true love, when it finally bloomed, could achieve miracles that challenged the very foundations of fate itself. These tales resonated through the ages because they revealed that even divine beings, for all their power and wisdom, remained vulnerable to the same emotions that governed mortal hearts. Among all the love stories that emerged from the divine realm, none was more haunting or more beautiful than the tragedy of Orpheus and Eurydice, a tale that began in joy and ended in loss, yet somehow managed to affirm the eternal power of love, even in the face of ultimate defeat. Orpheus was the son of Apollo and the muse Calliope, blessed with a voice that could move stones to weep and trees to dance, a lyre that could charm the wildest beasts and soothe the most savage hearts. His music was not mere entertainment, but a bridge between realms, a force that could reach into the deepest places of the soul and awaken emotions that listeners had never known they possessed. When he met Eurydice, a nymph whose beauty was matched only by her gentle spirit, their love seemed to fulfill the promise that the cosmos held for perfect harmony between souls. She moved like music given form, and he sang like love given voice, their union representing the marriage of all the arts, all the beauties that made existence more than mere survival. Their wedding day dawned bright with promise, blessed by gods and attended by creatures from every corner of the natural world, all drawn by the magic of their love and the beauty of Orpheus's celebratory songs. But even as the festivities reached their peak, tragedy struck with the sudden cruelty that seemed to stalk all mortal happiness. Eurydice, dancing through a meadow with her sister nymphs, stepped upon a serpent hidden in the grass, its venom claiming her life before anyone could offer aid. Orpheus's grief was so profound that it became a force of nature in its own right, his lamentations causing flowers to wither and streams to run backward, birds to fall silent, and even the stones to shed tears of sympathy. His music, which had once brought joy to all who heard it, now carried such sorrow that none could bear to listen, yet none could resist its terrible beauty. But grief, in Orpheus's divine heart, transformed into determination. If death had taken his beloved, then he would journey to death's very kingdom and bargain for her return. Armed with nothing but his lyre and his love, he descended to the underworld, becoming one of the few living mortals ever to make that perilous journey voluntarily. His music opened every door that barred his path, charmed every guardian that would have turned him back, and finally brought him to the throne room of Hades himself, where the Lord of the Dead sat beside his queen Persephone, surrounded by the shadows and whispers of departed souls. Before the throne of the King of the Dead, Orpheus sang a song of such heartbreaking beauty that it moved even those cosmic forces that seemed beyond all emotion. He sang of love that transcended death, of souls that belonged together across any barrier the cosmos might erect, of the injustice of separating two hearts that had found perfect unity in each other. Persephone wept at his song, remembering her own separation from the world of light and life, while even Hades, stern judge of the dead, felt his adamantine heart soften at the pure grief and love that poured from the mortal's lips. The very foundations of the underworld trembled with the power of that music, and for a moment the eternal order itself seemed poised to bend before the force of perfect love. Hades, moved by both the beauty of the song and the tears of his queen, granted Orpheus's request, but with conditions that reflected the inexorable nature of death's dominion. Eurydice would be restored to life and allowed to return to the upper world, but Orpheus must lead her out of the underworld without looking back, trusting in love and faith rather than demanding the reassurance of sight. The journey back to the world of the living was both hope and torment. Orpheus, straining his ears for the sound of his beloved's footsteps behind him, while fighting the overwhelming urge to turn and confirm that she was truly there. With each step, the temptation grew stronger, his love warring with his doubt, his faith challenged by the silence that followed in their wake. At the very threshold of the upper world, with sunlight visible just ahead and safety mere steps away, Orpheus's resolve finally broke. He turned to look upon his beloved, to reassure himself that she was real and safe, and in that moment of doubt, he lost her forever. Eurydice, still bound by the laws of death until she fully crossed into life, faded like a dream at dawn, reaching out to him even as she disappeared back into the shadows from which his music had briefly rescued her. The tragedy of their separation was not just personal but cosmic, a reminder that even the greatest love could not entirely overcome the fundamental laws that governed existence. Yet, in another sense, their story was a triumph, for Orpheus's music had achieved something unprecedented, had moved the unmovable and softened the heart of death itself, proving that love was indeed the strongest force in the cosmos, even when it could not achieve its ultimate goal. Orpheus never recovered from his loss, spending his remaining years wandering the earth and singing songs of such melancholy beauty that they became legendary, inspiring poets and musicians for generations to come. His eventual death at the hands of maddened followers of Dionysus was both tragic end and release, allowing him to join his beloved in whatever realm awaited souls that had loved truly and completely. The story of Eros and Psyche offered a different perspective on divine love, showing how even the god of love himself could become subject to the very forces he unleashed upon others. Psyche was a mortal princess whose beauty was so extraordinary that people began to worship her instead of Aphrodite, neglecting the goddess's temples to offer prayers and sacrifices to the mortal girl. Aphrodite's jealousy burned like the fires of creation in reverse, threatening to unmake the very beauty she had been born to protect and celebrate. She commanded her son Eros to strike Psyche with one of his arrows, causing her to fall in love with the most hideous creature that could be found, a punishment that would turn her great beauty into a source of shame and revulsion. But when Eros saw Psyche, her beauty was so perfect, so pure, that it pierced his own divine heart more deeply than any arrow he had ever crafted. In that moment, the god of love experienced for the first time the overwhelming power of the emotion he had spent eternity inspiring in others. Understanding at last why mortals would risk everything, sacrifice everything, for the sake of love. Unable to carry out his mother's command, yet afraid to reveal his disobedience, Eros devised a different plan. He arranged for Psyche to be taken to a magnificent palace where she would be his bride, but under conditions that echoed the ancient taboos surrounding divine mortal relationships. She could live in luxury beyond imagination, could have anything her heart desired, but she must never look upon her husband's face, must love him in darkness and trust in faith alone. For a time, this arrangement brought them both happiness that surpassed understanding. Psyche found in her invisible husband a companion whose mind matched her own, whose conversation delighted her, whose presence filled her with joy even though she could not see his form. Eros discovered that love given was even more wonderful than love inspired, that being loved for himself rather than feared for his power was a joy he had never imagined possible. But doubt, that ancient enemy of faith, began to work its poison in Psyche's heart. Encouraged by her jealous sisters, who convinced her that her husband must be some hideous monster who hid his true form in shame, they provided her with a lamp and a knife, urging her to look upon him while he slept, and, if he proved to be as monstrous as they suspected, to kill him before he could harm her. The moment when Psyche held her lamp above the sleeping form of Eros was one of the most beautiful and tragic in all mythology. The light revealed not a monster but the most beautiful of all the gods, his golden wings folded around him like a second blanket, his face serene in sleep, his whole being radiating the love that was his essence and his gift to the world. But a drop of hot oil from the lamp fell upon his shoulder, waking him to the sight of his beloved. holding the symbols of doubt and betrayal. His pain was not from the burn, but from the broken trust, not from physical hurt, but from the knowledge that their perfect love had been contaminated by suspicion and fear. Eros fled, and with him went all the joy and beauty from Psyche's life, leaving her to wander the world in search of forgiveness and redemption, seeking some way to prove that her love was stronger than her doubt, her faith deeper than her momentary weakness. The trials that Aphrodite imposed upon Psyche were designed to be impossible, tasks that would demonstrate the futility of mortal presumption in challenging divine power. But love gave Psyche strength and wisdom beyond her mortal nature, and with help from unexpected sources, she accomplished each impossible labor, proving that the human soul, when motivated by true love, could achieve miracles that rivaled the gods themselves. Her final trial was the most dangerous. She must journey to the underworld and obtain from Persephone a box of beauty to restore Aphrodite's faded complexion. The descent to Hades required all the courage and wisdom she had gained through her previous trials, and she succeeded in her mission only to fall victim at the last moment to the same curiosity that had doomed Pandora. Opening the box to sample its contents, Psyche was overcome not by beauty, but by the sleep of death, collapsing so close to her goal that success and failure seemed separated by the thinnest of veils. But her trials had not gone unnoticed by Zeus himself, who recognized in her struggles a love worthy of immortal reward. Eros, healed of his wounds and his heartbreak, pleaded with his father-in-law for Psyche's life and their reunion. And Zeus, moved by their constancy, granted not just forgiveness, but transformation. Psyche was made immortal. Her mortal nature burned away like dross in divine fire, leaving only the pure gold of a soul that had proven itself worthy of divine love. Their marriage was celebrated throughout Olympus, for it represented the triumph of true love over doubt, jealousy, and fear, the victory of faith over suspicion, the power of the soul to transform itself through love into something greater than it had ever imagined possible. These stories and countless others like them became the foundation of humanity's understanding of love in all its forms, showing that the greatest force in the cosmos was also the most vulnerable, that the deepest joys carried with them the potential for the deepest sorrows, that love was both the most human and most divine of emotions, capable of elevating mortals to the level of gods and bringing gods down to experience the full range of mortal feeling. In the love stories of the gods, mortals found both warning and encouragement, learning that love required not just passion, but patience, not just desire, but trust, not just attraction, but the willingness to sacrifice for the beloved's happiness. They learned that true love was not the absence of challenge, but the determination to face challenges together, not the avoidance of pain, but the willingness to endure pain for the sake of something greater than individual comfort or pleasure. Beneath the bright realms where gods held court and mortals lived their brief, intense lives, there stretched a domain that was both ending and beginning, destination and departure point, the one kingdom that every soul, mortal and divine alike, must eventually acknowledge as their ultimate sovereign. This was the realm of Hades, the underworld that served not merely as a place of the dead, but as the cosmic balance point where all of existence found its ultimate meaning and resolution. The journey to this shadowy realm began long before death itself, for every mortal carried within their heart an awareness of mortality that colored every joy with poignancy, every love with the knowledge of eventual separation. Every achievement with the understanding that time would ultimately claim all things. Yet, this awareness, rather than making life meaningless, gave it urgency and preciousness, transforming each moment into something worthy of attention and gratitude. The actual passage from life to death was guided by ancient customs that reflected humanity's deep understanding of the sacred nature of this transition. When a soul departed its mortal form, loving hands would place coins upon the eyes of the deceased, payment for Charon, the ferryman who waited at the banks of the river Styx to carry souls across the boundary between the world of the living and the realm of the dead. Charon himself was a figure both terrible and compassionate, ancient beyond measure, yet eternally present at his post. His weathered boat cutting through waters that reflected not light, but the accumulated sorrows and joys of countless lifetimes. He spoke little, for what words could adequately address the magnitude of the transition his passengers were experiencing. But his presence was oddly comforting, a reminder that even in death, souls were not abandoned, but guided by one who had witnessed this passage countless times and understood its necessity. The river Styx was not merely a boundary, but a transformative force, its dark waters washing away the immediate concerns and desires that had driven mortal existence, preparing souls for the different kind of existence that awaited them in Hades' realm. Other rivers flowed through the underworld as well, Lethe, whose waters brought forgetfulness of earthly pain, Acheron with its burden of woe, Cocytus echoing with lamentations, and Phlegethon burning with the fires of purification. Beyond the river lay the gates of the underworld, guarded by Cerberus, the three-headed hound whose fearsome appearance concealed a deeper purpose. His 3 heads were said to represent the past, present, and future, reminding all who passed that death was not an ending but a transformation, not a punishment but a natural progression in the cosmos's eternal cycles. His presence ensured that the living could not enter the realm of the dead without proper authority, while the dead could not return to trouble the world they had left behind. The underworld itself defied the simple descriptions that mortal imagination might create, for it was vast enough to contain the souls of all who had ever lived, yet intimate enough that each spirit found exactly the afterlife their mortal choices had earned. It was neither the paradise of eternal reward nor the hell of endless punishment that later religions would envision, but something more complex and more just, a realm where the true consequences of choices made in life finally became clear. Hades ruled this domain from a throne of polished obsidian, his crown wrought from metals that existed nowhere in the upper world, his scepter topped with a pomegranate that symbolized both death and rebirth, endings and beginnings. He was not the evil tyrant that fearful mortals sometimes imagined, but a just and necessary ruler, understanding that his realm served an essential function in the cosmic order. Beside him sat Persephone, the queen who had brought spring to the underworld, her presence transforming Hades' austere kingdom into something that could nurture souls as well as judge them. Her story of abduction and eventual acceptance of sorrow transformed into wisdom of loss that became gain, exemplified the complex nature of the underworld itself, where what seemed like tragedy often revealed deeper purposes and greater meanings. The souls who entered this realm were judged not by a single divine arbiter, but by 3 wise kings who had distinguished themselves in life through their wisdom and justice. Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Iolcus examined each soul's record, weighing not just actions but intentions, not just achievements, but the circumstances that had shaped choices. Understanding that true justice required understanding context as well as consequences. For most souls, the judgment led to the asphodel fields, a vast meadow where spirits existed in a state that was neither reward nor punishment, but simply continuation, a place where the experiences of mortal life could be absorbed and understood, where souls could find peace and gradual healing from the wounds that earthly existence had inflicted. Those who had lived lives of exceptional virtue found themselves in the Elysian fields, a realm of eternal spring where heroes and the righteous dwelt in happiness that surpassed their greatest earthly joys. Here the souls of mortals who had achieved something approaching divine virtue could exist in perfect contentment, their noble deeds bearing fruit in an afterlife that reflected the beauty they had tried to create in the world of the living. But the underworld also contained regions of punishment for those who had committed crimes against the gods or the natural order, places where the consequences of evil choices could be fully experienced and, perhaps, eventually understood. Tantalus stood forever beneath fruit trees whose branches pulled away when he reached for them, tortured by desires that could never be satisfied because he had betrayed divine hospitality. Sisyphus rolled his boulder eternally up a mountain that grew steeper with each attempt, learning through endless repetition the futility of trying to cheat death itself. Yet even these punishments were not merely vengeful, but educational, designed to help souls understand the true nature of their choices and the harmony they had disrupted through their actions. The hope was that even the most lost soul might eventually achieve understanding and find its way toward something resembling peace. The underworld was also home to the Furies, the terrible goddesses of vengeance, who pursued those who had committed crimes against the natural order, particularly those who had harmed their own family members. These ancient beings were not motivated by cruelty, but by an inexorable commitment to justice. Understanding that some crimes created wounds in the fabric of reality itself that could only be healed through acknowledgement and appropriate consequence. Occasionally, living heroes found their way into Hades' realm, drawn by quests that required them to confront the reality of death and the meaning of mortality. Heracles descended to capture Cerberus, learning that even the strongest mortal must eventually acknowledge death's sovereignty. Orpheus made his musical journey to reclaim his beloved, discovering that love could move even the ruler of the dead, though it could not entirely overcome the laws that governed existence. Theseus and Pirithous attempted the ultimate hubris, trying to kidnap Persephone herself, only to find themselves trapped until rescue came. Learning that some boundaries were not meant to be crossed, some desires not meant to be fulfilled. Even Odysseus, the craftiest of heroes, visited the underworld to seek prophecy from the dead, finding that the shades of departed heroes and friends could offer wisdom unavailable to the living. Each of these journeys revealed something essential about the relationship between life and death, showing that the underworld was not separate from the world of the living, but intimately connected to it, its existence giving meaning and urgency to mortal choices, its inevitability making each moment of life more precious because it was finite. The underworld also served as the source of the earth's fertility, for it was from the depths where Persephone reigned that seeds drew the power to sprout and grow, where the minerals that enriched the soil were forged in darkness and pressure. Death and life were revealed to be not opposites, but partners in an eternal dance, each giving meaning to the other, neither complete without its counterpart. In contemplating the underworld, mortals found not terror, but understanding, not despair, but acceptance of their place in the great cycle of existence. They learned that death was not failure, but completion, not punishment, but transformation, not ending, but transition to a different kind of existence, where the true consequences of their choices could finally be fully understood and, in understanding, perhaps transcended. The realm of Hades thus became a mirror in which the living could see themselves clearly, understanding that every choice carried weight beyond the immediate moment. Every action rippled through eternity. Every life, no matter how brief or humble, contributed something essential to the vast tapestry of existence that connected all souls across time and space. In the ancient world where gods walked among mortals and the future pressed against the present like storm clouds gathering on the horizon, there existed sacred places where the veils between what was and what would be grew thin enough for specially gifted souls to peer through and glimpse the threads of destiny being woven by the fates themselves. These were the oracles, the prophecy speakers, the riddling voices that offered mortals tantalizing glimpses of their futures, while simultaneously demonstrating the terrible complexity of trying to understand or escape what was to come. The most famous of these sacred sites was Delphi, where Apollo himself had established his oracle after slaying the great serpent Python that had previously guarded the prophetic springs. The temple complex that grew around this sacred spot became the spiritual center of the Greek world, a place where kings and common citizens alike could come seeking guidance from the god of prophecy, music, and rational thought. The Pythia, the priestess who served as Apollo's voice in the world of mortals, underwent transformations that bordered on the divine when the prophetic spirit descended upon her. Seated upon her sacred tripod above the fissures in the earth from which mysterious vapors rose, she would enter a trance that lifted her consciousness beyond the normal boundaries of human perception, allowing her to speak truths that her ordinary mind could never have conceived. But the prophecies that emerged from her lips were rarely simple or straightforward, for the future existed not as a single inevitable path, but as a complex web of possibilities, each dependent upon choices not yet made, actions not yet taken, decisions whose consequences would ripple through generations. The gods spoke in riddles, not to confuse or deceive, but because the truth about the future was itself riddling, paradoxical, requiring wisdom to interpret and courage to accept. King Croesus of Lydia learned this lesson when he consulted the Delphic oracle before launching a war against the Persian Empire. The prophecy declared that if he crossed the river Halys, he would destroy a great empire, words that seemed to promise victory and conquest. Only after his defeat did Croesus understand the oracle's deeper truth. He had indeed destroyed a great empire, but it was his own, not his enemies, that had fallen. The prophecy had been accurate, but his interpretation had been clouded by his desires and assumptions. This pattern of prophetic truth that confounded expectations while ultimately proving accurate became one of the most haunting themes in Greek mythology and thought. The oracles spoke not lies, but truths too complex for mortal understanding, revealing that the future was both fixed and fluid, inevitable and dependent upon choice, knowable yet mysterious. Nowhere was this paradox more tragically illustrated than in the story of Oedipus, the king whose attempt to escape his prophesied fate led him directly into its fulfillment. The oracle had declared that he would kill his father and marry his mother, a prediction so horrifying that it drove him to flee his homeland and the parents he believed had raised him, seeking to put distance between himself and the possibility of such terrible crimes. But fate, as the Greeks understood it, was not simply external compulsion, but the inevitable result of character interacting with circumstance, choices leading to consequences that revealed the deeper patterns governing existence. Oedipus's very virtues, his intelligence and determination, his courage and sense of justice, became the instruments through which his destiny was accomplished. At the crossroads, where three paths met, he encountered a stranger who struck him in arrogance and rage, and Oedipus, young and proud and quick to anger, struck back with fatal force, not knowing that he was killing Laius, the king of Thebes, his true father, whom he had never known. The act was not premeditated murder, but the tragic result of a moment's passion, yet it fulfilled precisely the first part of the oracle's prediction. The second part of the prophecy was accomplished through Oedipus's greatest triumph, his defeat of the Sphinx that had been terrorizing Thebes with her deadly riddle. The creature, with the body of a lion, the wings of an eagle, and the head and breast of a woman, had positioned herself outside the city's gates and posed her famous question to all who would enter: what walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs at noon, and 3 legs in the evening? The riddle was both simple and profound, a meditation on the nature of human existence disguised as a puzzle. The answer, man, represented not just clever thinking, but deep understanding of the human condition. Recognition that mortal life was a journey through different stages, each with its own characteristics and challenges, all leading toward the inevitable decline and dependence of old age. Oedipus's ability to solve the riddle demonstrated his intelligence and wisdom, qualities that made him worthy to be king of Thebes and husband to the widowed queen Jocasta. Yet in accepting these honors, he unknowingly married his own mother, completing the prophecy that he had spent his life trying to avoid. The revelation of the truth came years later, through another prophecy that declared that the plague afflicting Thebes could only be ended by discovering and punishing the murderer of the previous king. Oedipus, determined to save his people, pursued the investigation with the same relentless logic that had enabled him to solve the Sphinx's riddle, not knowing that he was hunting himself. The tragic irony of his situation lay in the fact that every step he took toward solving the mystery brought him closer to the devastating knowledge of his own identity and crimes. His intelligence, his sense of justice, his love for his people, all the qualities that made him a good king, became the instruments of his destruction as he uncovered truth after terrible truth. When the full horror of his situation finally became clear, when he understood that he had indeed killed his father and married his mother, that his children were also his siblings, that his entire life had been built upon foundations of unknowing sin, Oedipus chose to blind himself rather than look upon a world that contained such tragedy. His self-imposed blindness was both punishment and symbolic recognition that physical sight had failed to show him the true nature of his situation, that the external eyes that had seen so clearly had been useless in perceiving the deeper realities of his existence. In blinding himself, he acknowledged that some truths were too terrible to be borne by ordinary human perception. Yet even in his tragedy, Oedipus achieved a kind of greatness, for he faced the consequences of his actions without attempting to shift blame or deny responsibility. Though he had acted unknowingly, he accepted the weight of his deeds, understanding that intention did not erase consequence. that ignorance did not absolve one from the results of one's choices. The Sphinx herself represented another aspect of prophecy and fate, the feminine wisdom that guarded the thresholds between different stages of existence. Her riddle was not merely intellectual exercise, but initiation, a test that required candidates to demonstrate their understanding of the fundamental nature of human life before they could proceed to the next phase of their journey. Her destruction, when Oedipus solved her riddle, was not defeat but fulfillment, for her purpose had been to ensure that only those with sufficient wisdom could pass beyond her guardianship. In a sense, she was the guardian of the very wisdom that would eventually destroy the man who had defeated her, showing how victory and defeat, wisdom and ignorance, could be inextricably intertwined. The story of Cassandra provided yet another perspective on prophetic knowledge and its burdens. The Trojan princess had been granted the gift of prophecy by Apollo, who sought to win her love through this divine favor. But when she rejected his advances, the god could not rescind his gift, for divine promises, once made, could not be unmade. Instead, he added a curse. Her prophecies would always be true, but no one would ever believe them. Cassandra's fate was to see the future clearly, but be powerless to change it, to watch in helpless horror as events she had predicted unfolded, exactly as she had foreseen. Her warnings about the Trojan horse were dismissed as the ravings of a madwoman, her prophecies of Troy's destruction ignored until the flames were already consuming the city. Her story illustrated one of the cruelest aspects of prophetic knowledge, the isolation that came with seeing truths that others could not or would not acknowledge. She became a figure of tragic wisdom, understanding the future, but unable to share that understanding in any way that could help others avoid their fate. These stories of oracles, riddles, and prophecies revealed the Greeks' sophisticated understanding of fate and free will, showing that destiny was not simple predetermination, but the complex result of character choice and circumstance, interacting in patterns too intricate for mortal minds to fully comprehend. They suggested that while the future might be knowable, it was rarely changeable. That wisdom lay not in trying to escape one's fate, but in facing it with courage and dignity. The oracles and their prophecies served as reminders that mortal existence was part of a larger pattern, that individual lives, however important they might seem to those living them, were threads in a vast tapestry whose complete design could only be perceived from a divine perspective. Yet this knowledge, rather than making human choice meaningless, made it more significant. For even if the broad outlines of destiny were fixed, the manner in which individuals faced their fate remained a matter of personal choice and moral significance. As the ages turned and the world grew older, a subtle transformation began to occur in the relationship between mortals and the stories that had shaped their understanding of existence for countless generations. The gods did not suddenly vanish from their temples, nor did the heroes cease to inspire courage in mortal hearts. But something fundamental shifted in the way these ancient tales were perceived and preserved, as if the myths themselves were undergoing their own kind of metamorphosis. The change was gradual, like the imperceptible alteration of seasons, or the slow erosion of mountains by wind and rain. Where once the stories of Zeus and Hera, of Perseus and Medusa, of Orpheus and Eurydice, had been living truths that explained the very nature of reality, they began to transform into something different yet equally precious, symbols and metaphors that could illuminate the human condition in ways that mere facts and logic could never achieve. The poets were among the first to recognize and articulate this transformation. Homer, whose great epics would echo through history long after the temples of the gods had crumbled to dust, understood that the power of mythic stories lay not in their literal truth, but in their ability to capture essential aspects of human experience that transcended any particular time or place. When he sang of Achilles choosing between a long, obscure life and a short, glorious one, he was exploring choices that every person must face in some form, decisions about what makes existence meaningful and how much one is willing to sacrifice for lasting significance. He's here, in his careful cataloging of divine genealogies and cosmic histories, preserved the structural framework of mythic thought while simultaneously demonstrating how these ancient stories could serve as a foundation for understanding the natural world and humanity as place within it. His theogony was both religious text and philosophical treatise, showing how the chaotic violence of the earliest gods gradually gave way to the more ordered rule of the Olympians, a progression that seemed to mirror humanity's own journey from barbarism toward civilization. As Greek culture spread throughout the Mediterranean world, carried by traders, colonists, and eventually conquerors, the myths encountered new peoples with their own stories and beliefs, leading to a process of synthesis and reinterpretation that enriched the tradition while also changing it. Egyptian gods were identified with Greek ones. Roman deities acquired Greek characteristics and stories, and local traditions were woven into the expanding tapestry of mythic knowledge. This cultural exchange revealed something profound about the nature of mythic truth. The stories were flexible enough to adapt to new circumstances while remaining true to their essential insights about human nature and cosmic order. A farmer in Sicily and a merchant in Alexandria might worship different gods under different names, but both could find meaning in the tale of Demeter's grief and the changing seasons. Both could understand something essential about love and loss through the story of Orpheus and Eurydice. The rise of philosophy brought new challenges and new opportunities to mythic thinking. Philosophers like Plato treated the ancient stories with respectful skepticism, understanding that while they might not be literally true, they contained psychological and spiritual truths that could not be dismissed. His famous allegory of the cave drew heavily on mythic imagery and structure, using the language of symbol and metaphor to explore questions about reality, knowledge, and enlightenment that pure rational argument might not be able to address adequately. Other thinkers found in the myths rich material for ethical reflection, using the stories of heroes and gods to explore questions about virtue, justice, and the proper way to live. The tragic fate of hubris-driven characters like Icarus or Phaethon became cautionary tales about the dangers of overreaching one's proper limits, while the perseverance of heroes like Heracles or Theseus offered models of courage and determination in the face of seemingly impossible challenges. The transformation of myths from religious beliefs into literary and philosophical resources was neither sudden nor complete. Throughout the classical period and beyond, there remained those who maintained traditional religious practices, who offered sacrifices to the old gods and sought guidance from ancient oracles. But increasingly, the educated classes began to approach these stories with what might be called sophisticated appreciation, rather than simple faith, recognizing their power while understanding their symbolic rather than literal nature. The Roman appropriation of Greek mythology represented another crucial stage in this evolution. The Romans, with their practical bent and their genius for organization, systematized and codified the Greek stories, creating a standardized version that would influence Western literature for centuries to come. Writers like Ovid transformed the myths into elegant poetry that emphasized their psychological and emotional content, while historians like Livy used mythic patterns to give shape and meaning to the story of Rome's rise to power. But perhaps the most significant development was the gradual recognition that the myths belonged not to any single people or culture, but to humanity as a whole, that the stories transcended their particular origins to speak to universal aspects of human experience. The tale of Pandora's box resonated with anyone who had ever given in to dangerous curiosity. The tragedy of Oedipus spoke to all who had discovered uncomfortable truths about themselves. The journey of the Argonauts reflected every collective endeavor that required courage, cooperation, and persistence in the face of unknown dangers. Medieval scholars, working within a Christian framework that was often hostile to pagan mythology, nevertheless found ways to preserve and reinterpret the classical stories, seeing in them prefigurations of Christian truths or moral lessons that could supplement biblical teaching. The gods became symbols of human vices and virtues, their stories allegories that could instruct the faithful while preserving classical learning for future generations. The Renaissance brought a renewed appreciation for classical mythology as both artistic inspiration and philosophical resource. Artists found in the myths rich subject matter that could express complex ideas about beauty, power, love, and tragedy, while writers rediscovered the dramatic and narrative possibilities inherent in stories that had been tested by centuries of retelling and reinterpretation. This period saw the emergence of a new understanding of mythic truth, one that recognized the stories as neither literal history nor mere fantasy, but as a third category, imaginative constructs that could reveal truths about the human condition that neither empirical observation nor logical analysis might be able to uncover. The myths became a kind of laboratory for exploring human nature, a safe space where the consequences of different choices and character traits could be examined without real-world risk. The modern world has inherited this rich tradition of mythic interpretation and reinterpretation, finding in the ancient stories not outdated superstitions, but timeless insights into the patterns that govern human behavior and the forces that shape individual and collective destiny. Psychologists like Carl Jung discovered in mythic images universal symbols that seem to emerge spontaneously from the human unconscious, suggesting that the stories tap into something fundamental about how the human mind organizes and makes sense of experience. Writers and artists continue to find in Greek mythology an inexhaustible source of inspiration, not because they believe in the literal existence of Zeus or Aphrodite, but because these figures embody aspects of human experience that remain as relevant today as they were 3,000 years ago. The myths provide a vocabulary for discussing complex psychological and social phenomena, a set of metaphors and symbols that can illuminate contemporary concerns while connecting them to the broader human story. The transformation of the myths from religious beliefs to cultural symbols represents not their death, but their evolution into something more lasting and more universally accessible. As living religious systems, they were bound to particular times and places, dependent upon specific cultural contexts that inevitably changed and disappeared. As symbols and stories, they have achieved a kind of immortality, continuing to speak to new generations who find in them fresh meanings and contemporary relevance. This evolution reflects something profound about the nature of human storytelling and the way that truly great narratives transcend their origins to become part of the permanent heritage of our species. The myths have survived not because they are true in any literal sense, but because they are true in ways that matter more than factual accuracy, because they capture something essential about what it means to be human in a cosmos that is both beautiful and terrible, meaningful and mysterious, full of both wonder and sorrow. As our long night of storytelling draws toward its gentle close, and the first pale hints of dawn begin to touch the eastern horizon, we find ourselves changed by the journey we have taken together through the timeless landscapes of Greek mythology. Like Odysseus, returning from his wanderings, we carry with us memories of wonders and terrors, of gods and heroes, of love stories and tragedies that will continue to resonate in our hearts long after the last words have faded into silence. The myths we have explored tonight are not merely ancient stories preserved in dusty books or carved in weathered marble, but living forces that continue to shape how we understand ourselves and our place in the vast mystery of existence. In the struggles of Prometheus, we recognize our own desire to bring light to dark places, to share knowledge even at great personal cost, to lift others up despite the risks such generosity might entail. In the love of Orpheus and Eurydice, we find reflected every human relationship that has ever had to face the reality of loss. Every heart that has ever loved so deeply that it was willing to journey to impossible places for the sake of reunion. Every soul that has had to learn that some separations cannot be overcome by will alone. Yet love itself remains eternal and transformative. The heroes whose adventures we have followed speak to that part of every human heart that yearns for greatness, that refuses to accept limitations as final, that believes individual actions can make a difference in a world that often seems indifferent to individual suffering or aspiration. Perseus and Theseus, Heracles and Jason, all remind us that ordinary people can achieve extraordinary things when they are willing to face their fears, overcome their limitations, and act with courage on behalf of others. Even the gods themselves, for all their power and immortality, reflect aspects of our own nature magnified and clarified, showing us what we might become if our various qualities were developed to their ultimate extent. Zeus's struggle to rule justly while managing his own passions. Athena's attempt to balance wisdom with action. Aphrodite's exploration of the relationship between love and beauty. All mirror the conflicts and aspirations that define human moral and emotional life. The transformation of these stories from religious beliefs into cultural symbols and psychological insights has not diminished their power, but has actually increased their accessibility and relevance. No longer bound to a particular set of religious practices or cultural assumptions, they have become part of the common heritage of humanity, available to anyone who seeks to understand the deeper patterns that govern human experience. In our modern world, where science has explained many of the natural phenomena that the Greeks attributed to divine action, where technology has given us powers that might have seemed godlike to ancient peoples, where global communication has brought different cultures into contact in ways that would have amazed Homer or Hesiod, these ancient stories remain surprisingly relevant and illuminating. They remind us that beneath all the surface changes that mark different historical periods, human nature remains fundamentally consistent, that people in every age have faced the same basic challenges of learning to live with mortality, dealing with power and responsibility, understanding the relationship between individual desire and communal obligation, finding meaning in a cosmos that can seem both magnificent and indifferent. The myths also offer us something that pure rational analysis sometimes cannot provide, a way of thinking about complex issues that honors both intellectual understanding and emotional truth, that recognizes that the most important aspects of human experience often cannot be reduced to simple formulas or logical propositions. When we read about Pandora's curiosity leading to the release of evils into the world, we are not learning ancient science, but exploring the psychological truth that knowledge and progress often come at unexpected costs, that the same impulses that drive human advancement can also create new problems and challenges. When we follow Persephone's journey from innocent maiden to queen of the underworld, we are not studying obsolete agricultural rituals, but contemplating the process by which innocence must be lost for wisdom, to be gained the way that growth and maturity often require us to accept difficult truths about the nature of existence. The enduring appeal of these stories lies partly in their recognition that life is neither purely tragic nor purely comic, but something more complex that encompasses both joy and sorrow, triumph and defeat, love and loss in patterns that are both universal and individual, predictable and surprising. They offer us models for how to face the various challenges that life inevitably presents, how to maintain hope in the face of seemingly impossible odds, how to accept responsibility for our choices while recognizing the limits of our control, how to find meaning in struggle and beauty in imperfection, how to love deeply while accepting the reality of mortality. Perhaps most importantly, they remind us that we are not the first generation to face difficult questions about the meaning of existence, the nature of justice, the proper relationship between individual fulfillment and social responsibility. The same questions that troubled ancient Greeks continue to challenge us today, and their thoughtful exploration of these issues through story and symbol continues to offer insights that purely contemporary analysis might miss. As we prepare to return from this mythic realm to the everyday world of ordinary concerns and immediate responsibilities, we carry with us not answers, but better questions, not certainties, but a richer appreciation for complexity, not simple solutions, but a deeper understanding of what it means to be human in a cosmos that continues to inspire both wonder and humility. The fire around which we have gathered tonight was kindled thousands of years ago by storytellers who understood that human beings need more than mere facts to make sense of their existence, that we require stories that can contain and express truths too complex for simple statement, meanings too profound for straightforward explanation. That fire continues to burn, passed from generation to generation, kept alive not by any single culture or tradition, but by the continuing human need to find meaning in mystery, beauty in tragedy, hope in loss, wisdom in the contemplation of forces greater than ourselves, yet intimately connected to our deepest aspirations and fears. Tomorrow, when you wake to the practical demands of contemporary life, when you must navigate the specific challenges of your particular time and place, you will carry with you the memory of this journey through the timeless realm of myth. And in that memory, you may find unexpected sources of strength, understanding, and perspective. The gods may no longer speak from their oracles. The heroes may no longer walk among us in recognizable form, but the truths they embodied continue to live wherever humans gather to share stories, to seek meaning, to explore what it means to live with courage, wisdom, and love in a world that remains as mysterious and challenging as it was when Zeus first claimed his throne on Mount Olympus. The flame burns on, waiting for the next storyteller, the next listener, the next soul, ready to embark upon the endless journey of understanding what it means to be both mortal and magnificent, temporary and eternal, individual and part of something infinitely larger than ourselves. And so our Night of Myths concludes, as it began, with an invitation to wonder, to question, to explore the vast territories of imagination and insight that remain as relevant today as they were when the world was young and gods walked openly among mortals who were just beginning to understand the power and responsibility of consciousness in a cosmos full of infinite possibility.